To mark the end of the Christmas season, the very last day, and to celebrate Twelfth Night in the most Shakespearean way possible, today I'm going to show you how to make wassail. Today is the 12th day of Christmas. Yay! And that makes tonight Twelfth Night, which what better way to celebrate Twelfth Night than to make wassail. Now, it's also sometimes pronounced wassail, but it features in Shakespeare's play Twelfth Night as the character Feste declares his love of singing and breaks out into song no less than 5 times throughout the play. We talk a lot about this in this week's episode of That Shakespeare Life, where I interviewed Francois Leroy about Twelfth Night and traditional celebrations associated with 17th century England and the play. I'll link to that in the show notes, but today what we're going to make is the drink version that uses the same name. Wassail is the word that was used for singing at Christmas time, and it's also this particular drink. The recipe that we're going to use today comes from Suffolk, England. It's very old. I'm not 100% sure it dates back to the 17th century, but I do know that making a hot apple cider that featured sherry and port and apples was something William Shakespeare would have done to celebrate the Christmas season. Now, the recipe for wassail varied from county to county. So Suffolk had their recipe, and Warwickshire, where William Shakespeare was living in Stratford-upon-Avon, they would have had their own particular recipe because they were determined by the local ingredients and what was available to the local villages where they were living. So when you look up recipes for wassail, there's all kinds of different variations. And what we're using today is one that comes from the general time period of Shakespeare and from England. So it gets us pretty close to what William Shakespeare would have done. And it's a whole lot of fun to say that you drank something William Shakespeare would have drunk for Twelfth Night. This recipe is an apple-based cider. So first you bake the apples, and then you make the wassail, and you pour the wassail into a big punch bowl, and the apples are going to float in the wassail like decoration. After the punch has been consumed, you can eat the apples, and they taste really good with like ice cream or a custard or whipped cream as a kind of dessert after it's finished, because it's soaked up all the flavors of the wassail. It's delicious. But the ingredients that you're going to need are some apples, some sherry, port, a little bit of water for the pan. You'll need cinnamon sticks, cloves, ginger, nutmeg, 1 orange, and the recipe that I found calls for caster sugar, which I don't have. So today we're going to be using just regular, I'm using raw, unrefined cane sugar that in my estimation was close enough. But if you're wanting to be specific, you'll need to get caster sugar. You'll need a saucepan, a place to put the apples once they've baked, a pan to put the apples in to bake them in the oven, and you're gonna need an oven set to 400 degrees. What you're going to do first is to core the apple. Can you help me put them in the pan once I've cored them?
Yes.
All right. So I'm going to core them, and my wonderful assistant Tig is going to put them in the pan for me. If you have a coring tool, use that. If you don't, you can use a knife, but you're just going to cut out the center. You want the apple to stay whole and leave the skin on. We're going to cook them in the pan that way. Once you've cut the center out, so you can see through it, and the rest of the apple is still intact, that's when you place it in the pan. Can you put this in the pan?
Okay.
Right there. Up straight, so the circle is facing at the top, because we're going to put sugar down in each one. But then you just repeat that process with the other 3 apples.
Okay, yummy.
The traditional version of this recipe calls for 6 apples. I've halved the recipe to only use 3 because the only people drinking the wassail in my house are going to be me and my husband. So I didn't really need the dish that feeds 6 to 8 people. If you're making this for a party, you'll want to follow the recipe I've linked to below this video to make it double what you're going to see me make today. Okay, once you've got your apples in your pan, you're going to take just enough water to kind of cover the bottom of the pan. It's about 6 tablespoons, but you can eyeball this. You don't want the water to soak the apples, you just want it to keep them from burning in the pan. Then you're going to take your brown sugar, put it down inside each of the apples.
Okay, can I put one?
You can see why this is such a festive thing, because you can do it with your kids and your family. and it just brings everybody around. So the brown sugar goes inside the apples while they bake. The caster sugar, or in my case, the regular raw sugar, you're gonna save. It will go into the wassail once this is cooked. Next, you wanna add the flavoring to your wassail. So the apples are gonna add this saucy flavor that's gonna be the base of your wassail, and this is going to be where you get your flavor. You're gonna take whole cloves, and you want to push the clove into the orange. Just go around the whole orange and fill it with whole cloves. Push that in right there. Push it in. Now the recipe actually called for 6 apples and 1 orange, and as I mentioned, our recipe, we're having it to make less. So what we're gonna do is probably gonna taste a little more orange flavor than what a traditional recipe would taste like, just because I chose not to try and have the orange for the recipe.
I was trying to take that in.
There you go, try that. Good job. So Ty and I are gonna finish covering this with the cloves. This goes in with the apples, and I forgot to put it in there at first, so we're gonna throw it in there real quick. And it just sits right in the pan there with it. Ideally, you would have done that before you put the apples in there. After the apples bake with the orange in there, the juices are gonna seep out and create a juice in the bottom of the pan. That will be the base of our wassail. We'll put that into this saucepan, and then we'll add all the other ingredients. So I'm gonna add the other ingredients first, and then that way when the apple juice comes out, we can just pour the apple juice into the pan, mix it up, and we'll be ready to start our wassail. What goes in here is a half a teaspoon of ginger, a half a cup of sugar. Now this is 200 grams per 6 apples. I'm only using 3 apples, so I went with 100 grams of sugar, which is about a half a cup. It also calls for nutmeg. You could use 1/4 teaspoon of ground nutmeg. I have got whole nutmeg, and I'm just gonna grate about 1/4 teaspoon into the pan. Again, because we have to the recipe that I'm following, it called for 2 cinnamon sticks. I'm just gonna put 1. If you like cinnamon the way I like nutmeg, you could probably put 2 sticks of cinnamon. But to me, cinnamon is one of those flavors that's really easy to overdo because it has just a strong flavor. So I'm erring on the side of light cinnamon for this recipe. The original recipe called for 300 milliliters of sherry and port, 300 milliliters each. Well, that has been halved for our recipe because we're only making it for 2 people instead of for 6 to 8 people. In England, they measure things with milliliters, and here we measure them in cups. 300 milliliters is about 1.25 cups. So half of that would be like a half and an eighth, so that's like a little bit over half a cup. I'm not going to be incredibly precise, but I also don't want to add too much because we want to be able to stand up when we drink this. So a half and a splash of sherry. That smells so good, oh my goodness. And then a half and a splash of port. Okay, and then what we're gonna do is we're just gonna stir that up. What we'll do once the apples come out of the oven is we will add the apple juice to this, and then we will slowly heat it up until the sugar dissolves, and then we'll bring it to a boil. In 16th and 17th century England, when William Shakespeare was growing up in Stratford-upon-Avon, England, one of the most popular celebrations of the Christmas season and the 12 days of Christmas that would have been served on days like today to mark Twelfth Night, the night before Epiphany, and the last day of the Christmas season, would be to go wassailing. Now, wassailing is when you would sing traveling from house to house. It was a form of begging, and people would go from house to house to house asking for food and beverage and other charitable givings, because being charitable was part of the Christmas season. There was a lot of role reversal, and it was just a general happy sharing time. And so that's how the song and the beverage came to be blended in terms of the word that we use describes both. Sometimes this drink that we've made today would even be served in a large wooden bowl that would be wrapped with holly and ivy and red ribbon and carried from house to house to house to share with people. Take them out. You see how it's got that juice in the bottom? That juice we're going to pour in our pan. And the apples we're going to save to add in after. So the first step here is to get the apples out of the pan. So I've made a tin foil pocket that I'm going to put mine into, where they will sit. That's hot. Where they will sit, ouch, and stay hot. You don't want to take the entire orange. You want to cut it in half. You leave the cloves in there, and you cut the now very hot orange in half and put half of it in your pot. You would use half one for the whole recipe. By rights, I should quarter it, but I really like the orange flavor. I think it's gonna balance this out really well. So I'm leaving it at half. You can make the adjustments that you wanna make. Now there's this nice syrup juice in the bottom of the pan, and we're gonna pour that in here as well. I will tell you, the recipe said that this was supposed to take about 30 minutes to even to 45, but when I switched it from 6 apples to 3, it only took half the amount of time. This was about 20 minutes for the apples to get soft. And you do want to watch them because everybody's oven is different, and you don't want your apples to fall apart. Now, like I said, we're making dinner, so look over dinner and into back here. And what we want to do first is dissolve the sugar. Remember, we put half a cup of raw cane sugar down in here, and we're going to heat it up just enough to melt the sugar. Once the sugar is melted, then we will bring it to a boil and then turn it down immediately and let it sit. Then we'll take it back over there and put the apples back in it, and it'll be ready to drink. Oh, this smells so good. It smells very citrusy. At this point, what you do is you add the apples back in there, and I'm actually gonna get the orange out. The recipe didn't say for sure what you're supposed to do with the orange, but I don't want the cloves to fall off in the drink. So I'm gonna get that out now that we have the flavor, and I'm gonna put the apples back in. Seep in. So now, when you put it in there, the apples float in there. Now remember, I have our recipe. So this would be, they would be actually floating up in there if you'd made the full version for 6 to 8 people. So this is a small version. It's also why I'm not transferring it over to a punch bowl. But if you want to be very Shakespearean about it, you'll get a wooden punch bowl and put the wassail in that and decorate the bowl with holly and ivy and red ribbon. Those are the traditional ways to decorate a wassail bowl, and this is traditional wassail. Right, so let's see what does wassail taste like. Oh my goodness, it's like good cheer in a cup. It has all of these warm, Christmassy flavors. So now that we've made our wassail drink, we're gonna go and enjoy dinner, and I hope that you and your family can make this at home and experience Shakespeare for yourself. Thank you for joining me this week. If you like this video, please hit like and subscribe, and let me know if you'd like to see more ways that you can experience Shakespeare. I'm Cassidy Cash, That Shakespeare Girl, and I hope you learned something new about the Bard. Bye-bye, I'll see you next week.